The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and thank you, or actually good afternoon. So used to saying good morning for these things. Good afternoon and thank you for joining today's webinar and JCAR's latest update on the safeguards rule compliance and why dealerships need to not procrastinate when it comes to protecting themselves. Our presenters today are Cheryl Nens, Vice President of Sales at COMPLYAUTO and a 25-year industry veteran, as well as Grayson Hannigan, NJCAR Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs, and Judy Van, Founder and CEO of JB Solutions, and the brains behind the NJCAR Academy. The webinar will cover which safeguard requirements dealers should be compliant with currently and which go into effect on June 9th of this year, a little more than 2 months from now. The presenters will also cover technical requirements that may need software upgrades, consumer privacy rights, cookie banners, vendor responsibilities, and what dealers can do to ensure their data is secure. Before we begin, just 2 quick housekeeping details. On the right-hand side of your screen is a control panel. Take particular note of the questions tab. During the call, participants will be muted, but if you have any questions, you can enter them in the questions tab, which I will be monitoring, or you can enter them in the chat that I believe all the presenters can see. So now I'd like to turn things over to Judy Van for a brief introduction. Judy?
Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. We thought that this would be very timely since it is the middle of March and the new deadline for the FTC safeguards changes is going to be June 9th. Many of you have implemented many things in your dealership at this point, but there's probably still a lot of work you have to do. If you've been on our webinars in the past, and we're not going to drive everything that we did before as far as what the 145 pages cover, but we know that we're responsible for what we collect in the dealership, what we create in the dealership, and what we control in the dealership. And certainly that puts us with a lot of liability when it comes to non-public information and customer information in our store. So just as a little intro for Cheryl, we have 3 partners that we've partnered with at NJCAR to cover these 3 aspects. I call it the physical, the technical, and the administrative. And from a physical standpoint, we have a partner that will help us for the sales process and the collection and creation of documents. We have another partner that Cheryl works with, COMPLYAUTO. They help us with the technical and the cybersecurity and the privacy aspect. And then we have AutoTreeve, who helps us with the controlling of the documents and the scanning and document retention. So between those 3 partners, we feel that we've really got our dealers covered. Some of you may need one, some of you may need all, but whatever the needs are in your dealership, we at NJCAR want to make sure that you have the proper partners. So between DS, GSA, Dealer Safeguards Solutions, AutoTreeve, and COMPLYAUTO, we feel that we've really picked the right partners to help you out in your dealership. So Cheryl is very knowledgeable. She's a great presenter, so I'm going to turn it over to her. She's got a lot of information for you that's really going to clarify the difference between what we had to do in 2003 and what now we have to do in 2023. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl.
Hi, thank you, Judy, for that recommendation, and I'm pleased to be here. I know some of you on the call may already be a COMPLYAUTO customer, but this call is also for you, as I think this is always a really great education. Wait, what are the rules and why am I doing them? But there is a lot of changes that have been done on the technical side and by what COMPLYAUTO can offer. So maybe you're struggling on the technical side and we have something that we can help you with, or just you're here to learn more about it for education. So this is definitely going to be a lot. I will be sending this deck out later, and if you guys have any questions at the end of this deck, I have a QR code. You can scan that and it has my direct email and telephone number. Okay. All right, so let me go ahead and get started. So just a little bit let me make sure it's presenting right. Okay, just a little bit about us. I think most of you have heard of us, but I just really wanted to iterate that we invented this product because a lot of us were dealers ourselves. Not me. I was always an OEM girl for a long time. But this started really out of the frustration of dealers trying to manage a lot of compliance, and it was taken away from the day-to-day. And so they brought the solution to you. And we're now in over 7,500 dealers. We're endorsed by 35 different state associations, including NJCAR. And then that is not a made-up number. I just verified that last week, and we have over a 99.999% dealer retention rate. Okay, so when we talk about info security, there's really 3 pillars of information security compliance. So I know most of you are thinking about the revised FTC safeguards rule, but I want to make you aware of a couple of other areas. Either it's consumer privacy rights or your state data breach laws. All right, so let's talk about the FTC safeguards rule. This is the one that's coming up June 9th. It was extended. This is not a new rule, and how I like to differentiate this is Cherylisms. Nobody else says this, but this is really your Fort Knox rule, meaning what data do you have on your customers, and you need to protect that like gold and keep it secure, okay? So while this is not a new rule, it has been revised for the first time in over 20 years, and when they revised it, they put in a lot more requirements for you, including that dealers are a non-banking financial institution, which is why you fall privy under these rules. So I'll get into more of those details in a moment. But what a consumer privacy right rule is like, hey, what information are you collecting on me as a consumer, like with a cookie banner, or like I want to know my rights, and if I want to stop sharing that information, I have that right to do so. So while New Jersey does not currently have this rule, there are some states around you that have. Both New York and New Jersey are looking at similar rules, but we've seen the FTC really take a lot of actions under the Section 5, and I want to make sure that you're protected. And then finally, make sure that you know any of your state data breach laws. All 50 states now have data breach laws that says that if you have some sort of cybersecurity event, you have to report it. So we help you manage that too, but just be aware of some of those things that are there for you. Okay, now let's get into the FTC rule requirements. So a lot of these up here, the qualified individual or intrusion and detection, these are some of those new tools that are out there. And while the FTC did extend the deadline by 6 months, the extension did not apply to all the rules. There's about 3, which I'll go over, that are currently needing to be done in your dealership. One of the reasons why you care about this or should care about this is they have upped the enforcement actions from last year from 47,000 to 50,000. That's a new action that, if you don't know about, in both FTC and OSHA have now put into effect as of this year, that they are going to raise fines every year as part to keep up with inflation. So OSHA had not been doing that before. They just went out and sent out a rule. So FTC is doing that similar enforcement action where they've upped their violations. And if you haven't started on this, you know, the cost, the NADA did a study that said the upfront cost can be very costly. That is, if you went out and hired someone, the attorneys to draft a lot of these policies, a lot of the IT infrastructures and systems. So please, please, please do not ignore this. All right, let's get into those actual federal safeguards rules. So I'm going to give you some practical applications that you can start doing today. Even if you don't hire anyone, you're doing this on your own. Let's be clear on what these rules are, okay? The first rule is that you need to have 4 written policies. So that first one is your written information security program. That should be in place right now. That was not extended. This is also something that you may already have. Maybe there's a dusty old binder from when this rule came out in 2002. I encourage you to find that binder, dust it off, throw it away, and you're going to have to make sure that you incorporate new requirements from either your state laws, or if maybe you're using, like, hey, you got an example, there's some really great examples out there. NADA even has one as a template for a policy, but I encourage you not to just use those templates. You have to be very careful and read through them, as a lot of those templates have all the rules, and you don't want to put in black and white anything that you're not following. So for instance, there's a lot that has to do with multi-factor authentication, and maybe right now you do not have multi-factor authentication, so you don't want to include that in your policy. So a lot of those templates you have to be able to read through, take out what does not apply to your dealership, and then if you do make any changes, you're going to have to remember to go back and rewrite and put in some of that language. You also need what's called an incident response plan. I encourage you, this incident response plan should include whether it's your IT team, your cybersecurity insurance, or any of your legal counsel, as they will be helping you through any incident, meaning if you had a data breach. A data retention plan, this is your annual review of how often you should be deleting or destroying either electronic or paper files. And then an IT change management procedure, meaning, hey, what do we do if we change our operating systems, or we get new computers, or we even have a data breach? What do we need to do? And all these need to be made available to your employees, and they have to sign off on them. All right, the second thing is it's also a written requirement, and this also needs to be done on the physical side. The technical, they did extend with the deadline, but the annual written risk assessment, how this different is hey, your policy up top, that's saying like what your policy is we have MFA. Your annual written risk assessment, this is going line by line, rule by rule, and saying specifically what you're doing in your dealership. So maybe the rule is MFA, we have it, we use Duo Cisco's, it's on all systems everywhere, you know, saying specifically how you've mitigated that risk and what you're doing, which may be different if you have multiple dealerships, as you might run things a little differently. So this is an annual requirement. This is also a really great time to remind you that, hey, compliance on the FTC safeguards is not good enough just to do it and quit it. The rules are written a lot like taxes, meaning they have put in requirements that are either going to be annually or biannually, meaning twice a year. So we will have to do these constantly, much like taxes. All right, your written risk assessment, normally it's two different written risk assessments. One is your physical. These are those rules I like to call the bed checks. This is your clean desk policy. Do you have shred bins by all your printers or copy machines? Do you have all like file cabinets, and only those that need to know that information gets into it? So double check that. Your technical one gets into specifically what technologies you have. So make sure that you don't just look at the regulations themselves, but really incorporate like what's going on. Like you've seen, like there's been a lot of FTC guidance or lawsuits specifically around cookie banners, so you can incorporate that in your policies or written risk assessments. And then make sure that as you're doing this, you're reviewing this, marry it up to your cybersecurity insurance renewal application, as they will be doing some of these very same questions, and you want to make sure that those two match. Okay, that's just an example of like what our policy is. At COMPLYAUTO, they are, or our risk assessment. As you can see, like we keep track of everything there. Okay, now the next part is people. So the law is going to apply to your people in two different areas. The first is all employees must be trained on security awareness training and have that policy that I just talked about, okay? Now, when I say all, that means you do have to train everyone, as the law doesn't provide any exceptions for lot porters or part-time car drivers, okay? And then the best practice is, whether you're using a program or you're writing your own, is to really incorporate topics that are like under national security frameworks, like, hey, we should have complex passwords. If you're using MFA, your dealership should have a complex password of at least 8 characters. If you do not have MFA on right now, you should be using a complex password of 14 characters. Complex password meaning it needs to have capitals, numbers, and characters, and they should be unique. I do not use the same password for my DMS as I do my CRM. I have a separate password for everyone. Okay, and then make sure if you are looking or shopping for training, you're using something that's specific to dealerships, because as we know, dealerships are, very unique. Using a generic bank bank training or office training is not going to be very relevant to something like your service drive. Okay, the next area is phishing and social engineering simulations. And this is actually that rule. We cite the rule for you if you want to look it up. This is an extension of the penetration test, which I'm going to get into in a moment. But what the pen test does is it tests technical areas. The phishing and social engineering tests probably the weakest area in your dealership, and that is your employees, as they can be very susceptible to clicking on things that they shouldn't. We should all know right now that there is no free Starbucks gift card, so if you receive an email as such, please do not click on it. So what this is sending out fake emails to your employees. And the reason why we do this is 95% of all cybersecurity breaches start with an employee clicking on an email that they shouldn't have, or they downloading a file. And so it's highly effective if you phish or train everyone, because within 90 days, you see the chances of them falling for a victim of a phishing attack decrease by about 90%. So there's several out there. There's KnowBe4. We have our own client, but you just want to make sure that you're including common templates, like, you know, maybe it's Office 365. You need to change your password, or CDK or something like that. So here's a little bit of some of the training that we have at COMPLYAUTO. Just an example. This one is the dealership security awareness training. This is the one that you need to train everyone. But we have other courses in here in other compliance areas if you need it, like adverse score disclosures or adverse action notices or credit score disclosures. That's all free that comes with it. Here's an example of like what phishing emails should look like. Hey, maybe your bonus, your free Starbucks gift card, or something like use something that you already use, like your DMS or your CRM provider, like CDK, and have it take a step further where it actually goes beyond and ascertains. It's like, hey, click here to change your password, and then take it to a fake landing page like this. This is where you're really going to test your employees. Are they going to give out their passwords? If they do, that right there simulates that you just had a hack or a breach, as the bad guys just now know how to get into your network. So that's why phishing is so important. So you're really testing your employees. Okay, now we get into the vendor section of the rule. So notice this is one of the ones that are highlighted, meaning that currently the way the law is written, you should already have all your service contracts already done. So let's back up, and why are you being required to get contracts from all your service providers? Because dealerships are considered a non-banking financial institution, meaning you're helping customers get credit. So therefore you're under this rule. Your third-party service providers, like your DMS or your CRM or even your credit report company that gives you those scores, they are not. But because, remember this is the Fort Knox rule, you're giving out little pieces of gold, your customer information, to these service providers. That is why you're required to make sure that they uphold the FTC safeguards rule. So you're going to have to get them to sign a contract that says that they're going to uphold the safeguards rule. A couple quick questions I always get asked is like, what about the OEMs? OEMs right now, most do not think that they're covered as a service provider. The NADA disagrees. And in fact, the NADA has been working with a lot of those OEMs to change their mind. I know VW and Audi organization just agreed to start signing these disclosures, and I think Hyundai has as well. So how we approach it at COMPLYAUTO is, yes, send these out to the OEMs. They may not sign it. It's potentially a gray area, but it's best that you are trying and showing that you have done to your best of ability, and the OEMs will figure it out and let NADA figure it out. But someone you don't need to worry about is your bank or your lenders, as they're already financial institutions. They already follow under this rule. And so this rule only does apply to vendors collecting NPI. So like your HR vendors, or I get asked a lot, like, what about my janitorial staff, or like landscaping company, or my oil vendor? None of those collect customer information. You do not have to get them to sign that service contract, okay? But when you get them to sign that service contract, it's not enough for you just to get them to promise. You need to make them prove it. So that's what the annual service provider risk assessment is. So you have to do some sort of a check-in, basically ask them like, hey, do you do a pen test? Do you do phishing simulations? Do you have an information security program? Do you have cybersecurity insurance? And you need to check in with them. So no, you don't have to physically inspect them or make them perform a pen test, but you do have to do a check-in and ask them about it, okay? Now, I get asked a lot is like, hey, what happens if one of these vendors refuses to sign, or they sign and then they don't do well on my check-in? They don't do half the things that they promised to do. Well, the FTC's position is very clear on this, and they say you should not continue doing business with vendors who have failed to complete the contract and the risk assessment. So very, very important. Now, technically, they do have until June 9th, so we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But after June 9th, any of those vendors that are not upholding it, that is a risk for you. You need to seek your own legal counsel, but the FTC says you should not be working with them, okay? Now, of course, COMPLYAUTO does make it easy. We have hundreds of templates already in here. We have many of these documents already signed. You can see we have a lot of the risk assessments completed, and then we also score them over here. These that are in yellow or red, generally speaking, they don't have something like MFA. We will re-ask them before June 9th, so you're aware of like if they've made any changes or anything like that. All right, now we're getting in the technical side of the tool, is the annual penetration and the biannual vulnerability scan. So dealers must perform a true annual internal penetration test. So I get asked all the time, hey, I think my bank does this for me. That's more PCI compliance. That's an external. It's a very simple test, and that is not compliant to this rule. You need to have a full annual internal penetration test of your networks. And then you also have to do a biannual vulnerability assessment. So let me break this down. This is the most costly portion of the rule. NADA estimates it's costing dealers anywhere between $15,000 and $30,000 to run one of these tests. So I want to make sure that you understand what it is. And so if you're going out and paying for it, I want to make sure that you're paying for the right thing, okay? Consider a vulnerability scan and a penetration test. This is kind of like when you buy a house, you get an inspection report, right? You kind of want to know what you're buying. Is it a money pit? Does it have leaky pipes, a bad foundation? I'll need a new roof. You know, that's what it is. Where am I vulnerable when I buy that house? Same thing here. That's what it is. A vulnerability scan is looking for things like old operating systems. You're on Windows 7 versus Windows 10, or you have employees that are still putting in password 1234 as their password, or something else. And then what a penetration test does is it's going to exploit those vulnerabilities, and we're actually going to simulate anything from like password cracking to remote code execution or sniff out credentials or emulating ransomware or malware injections. Now, of course, any good pen test doesn't do those things, but they really try to find those weaknesses and see if like, hey, if I was a hacker, would I have gotten through, okay? So normally you get sent out a device. It's sometimes called a Raspberry Pi. That's kind of the generic term of it, or it's some sort of computer scanning device. Now, I get asked all the time, what about continuous monitoring? So this is kind of going in a rabbit hole, but I want to make sure that you guys understand this technology, okay? Is what continuous monitoring is defined by the FTC is a very, very advanced and expensive system that would normally cost you around $600,000. They're looking for six figures, $100,000. They're looking for three things. They're looking for constant 24/7, 365 days a year security threats, which is what like an EDR endpoint threat detection tool does. They're looking for constant misconfigured system settings. And then they're also looking for constant vulnerability scans. Now, this is where the NADA really fought back, the FTC, and said, you cannot make this a requirement for dealers or you'll put a lot of them out of business. So the FTC went ahead and made an alternative solution. The alternative being that dealers had to perform an annual penetration test and a biannual, twice a year vulnerability scan. And then you have to run some sort of intrusion and attack detection, some sort of intrusion and attack detection like an EDR tool that's constantly looking for any sort of intrusion, okay? Again, going back to my example of that builder inspection report, it's really important that you get someone other than your service advisor, your service provider, your IT systems provider to do this. Because having them run their own penetration test on their own systems that they set up for you is much like a builder doing their own inspection report on the home. Do you think they're going to be biased and tell you like, hey, I didn't use the best insulation on this house? No. So that's why you really want to go out and hire a third-party company to run this pen test for you, okay? And then what comes out of that pen test is kind of like your punch report. You know, that's, hey, sellers, I would like you to fix these things before I go and buy this house. Same thing here. You'll get a list from this that looks similar to this of things that were found on your penetration test. So then you can go and say like, hey, these IP addresses, maybe they have old operating systems, or this password that Jimmy was using. I can tell that's Jimmy and F&I. We were able to crack that password in over 10 seconds. So now you can go and have a sit-down conversation with Jimmy that he needs to change all his passwords. Okay, there's some more mundane areas of the law where you need to keep a device inventory and a data and systems inventory. What that means is like, hey, what information are we collecting and where is it being held, all right? And so you can't, the reason why the FTC makes you do this is you can't track data if you don't know where it's being stored. And then the final thing is that you need to write an annual report to the board of directors, okay? So if you don't have a board, of course, you're just a single, you know, then it's the dealer principal or other officers or owners. But the idea is that the FTC is really trying to create accountability so they can say like, hey, management wasn't aware of it. Like, no, you received your annual report. But this is a really great resource for you to use during your cybersecurity insurance renewal as a way way to prove that you are super cyber secure and all the things that you're doing to hopefully have those rates not go up. This is an example of what a data systems inventory is, meaning like what kinds of customer information are you collecting and what vendors or systems or departments does it interact in. And then here's an example of what an annual report looks like. You know, it should have some sort of overall status of compliance or a report card, so you have that proof of what has been done. Okay, so now I briefly ran through all the rules on the FTC safeguard side. There's a couple things that I want to get into the technology portion of it that you need to be aware of, okay? Inside of those 2 risk assessments that I was talking about, that annual risk assessments, there's going to be that physical one where I said it was kind of like the bed checks. Do we have a clean desk policy? But then there's a section that goes into some very technical requirements. Inside of those technical requirements, you will be required to go out and have certain levels of technology. So if you don't have those levels of technology, you will need to go out and purchase them and make sure you have that level of technology. Okay, so I want to make sure that you are aware of what that is so you can be thinking about that and plan ahead for it, okay? The first thing is intrusion and attack detection. So we briefly already spoke on this, like it's sometimes referred to as a tool called EDR or endpoint detection. So some OEMs or your insurance, cybersecurity insurance carriers are requiring systems for this. I get asked a lot like, oh, is this my antivirus? No, this is not your antivirus, and I want to make you very familiar with the difference between an EDR tool and an antivirus. Think of your antivirus as your flu shot, okay? We got that flu shot based on what? Last year's flu. So if a new strand comes out, you're not always protected. Same thing with an antivirus. An antivirus is normally about 6 months behind, meaning if I do what's called a 0-day threat, like I just came out with a new threat, it's not going to catch up to your antivirus for about 6 months. So you need some sort of intrusion and attack detection as your stopgap. And that's where an endpoint threat detection comes in. You may already have this, especially if it's being required by your OEMs. You're probably paying for it through a company called Sophos, Newspire, SentinelOne, Huntress, CrowdStrike. That's a few of them, okay? So if you have an EDR tool, if you're familiar with it, there's a few others out there. There's a SIM or MTR. Our tool actually includes both technologies, EDR and MTR. The difference is EDR is an AI, meaning like your computer is always scanning and looking for threats. And an MTR is managed threat response, meaning we call it eyes on glass. Someone, a human, is reading those reports and intervening on your behalf at 2 a.m. in the morning when you cannot, okay? The next part of the rule is user and employee monitoring and logging. Okay, rule number 10, this is like that outside threat. I call this your ADT system, right? We want the alarm on. Now, the rule number 11, this could be a sneakier threat. This could be, again, internally from whether it's our employees knowingly or unknowingly doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So this is generally referred to as data loss prevention or data governance. So there's not a lot of great particular technologies or tools out there, and the FTC doesn't give a lot of guidance on what you should use, but they just want to make sure that you have some way that you are constantly scanning and monitoring. If you have an employee that goes in and maybe they're disgruntled and they want to download all their customers from the DMS and then take it to the Honda store, do you have some way to identify that? Or maybe it's something like a data governance where, you know, the business office is asking the F&I office, hey, I didn't get that credit card information right, can you resend it to me? And they type in that credit card information. That's data governance. You should not be sending things back on the interweb of customer information unless it's encrypted. So you have to have some sort of user and employee monitoring logging, or what we call DLP, data loss prevention, okay? We have a tool if you use it. So if you're new to COMPLYAUTO, or I'm sorry, if you've had COMPLYAUTO, this is new to COMPLYAUTO, we have a tool that you can look at that kind of measures. It has a portion of the spamware or spam filtering, data governance, meaning, hey, I did all those emails and I didn't see any payment or information, or which ones have had mass downloads or bot attacks, or firewalls are disabled, or unencrypted endpoints, things like that. Okay, now let's get into two other rules, and these are really regards to devices. So when I say devices, I'm specifically speaking mainly about your computers, laptops, workstations, Chromebooks, things like that. So there's a lot of rules around encryption. I just want to level set First rule is encryption is that you need email encryption. So enable your TLS for all emails. It says certificate. So specifically, if you have like Office or Microsoft 365 or Gmail, you should have that setting to go in and set up your emails, okay? To have that little lock button, that encryption. Therefore, my example again, where the business office, like, emails the finance office, if they encrypt it, you really have to make sure that they are using that encryption button and it's protecting that information. There's a lot of encryption you'll see in your technical risk assessment. When you're talking about encryption, you want to make sure that your copiers and your printers are also encrypted, because think about it, they all have hard drives and they're all connected to your internet or your web. So you're going to have to check with your lease providers and all of them to make sure, like, hey, do we have encryption, and you're deleting those hard drives. And then the other area is you actually have to make sure that all your hard drives are. Now, fortunately for you, there's a free tool on most of them. You can enable BitLocker, and I think it's called Vault Keeper on Apple devices. But that's where you go in. It takes about 5-10 minutes to turn on that computer, and then you have to at least manage those really long password keys. So at a minimum, I would make sure this is on at least all your finance, sales, business office computers, but the law says it needs to be on all of them. And you have to manage those encryption keys, okay? So that's a little bit about encryption. The next thing is, it's kind of the buzzword of the year, is multi-factor authentication. So this is that secondary authentication, much like if you log into your banking or your 401k systems and it asks you for a password, and then you have to put in like a 5 or 6 character password or numeric, secondary password. So dealers are going to have to implement MFA on a lot of systems to be able, that has anything to do with customers. So I want to go over those 3 areas. The first one is email MFA. So again, if you have Office 365 or Gmail, you can go into the settings and you can turn on MFA. This does not mean every time your employees check their MFA or their email that they're going to have to log into MFA, but they will anytime that they like log in from like a new device, like their phone or their laptop or their iPad, okay? They'll have to put in that MFA. The next one is application MFA. So this is going back to your vendors. This is your third-party providers. When you log into their systems, do they have MFA? Now, you'll know this because you're doing those check-ins with them, or COMPLYAUTO will let you know if you're using us. So that's where you have to ensure that all your third-party providers have MFA. And then the third area is devices. So this is normally where I get that collective groan. Wait, you mean on every computer I have to have, like Windows login, I have to have MFA? Yes. Wait, you don't mean my mechanics, do you, Cheryl? Yes, I do. Now, there's some solutions, the mechanics, maybe you can have that MFA timeout at 4 to 6 hours that they plug that in. But at your finance office and your business office, every single time they log in, they're going to have to use MFA. If you guys are using a system called Windows Hello, or like that fingerprint on your Apple computer, that's really not MFA, as that's like, that takes over for your password. It's not a secondary passcode. So facial recognition, those things don't really work. You really need a tool like Cisco Duo. That's what we use here at COMPLYAUTO. It's kind of the gold standard when it comes to MFA. Or there's Okta, Google Credential Provider. There's some out there. So you need a device level MFA. So how you know you'd have the right one is, generally speaking, oh, this is our screen for multi-factor, but I had a picture of what MFA looks like. Just a second. Let me see. Oh, here it is. So we're looking for that encryption button on all of our emails. And then you need to have something like on Duo, it will like send you out a text, and then it can sync up to your computer. Yep, this is me, and you can hit that button. So you don't actually have to type in that password every time, but you have to have something synced like that. Or you could use other secondary factors. I know some of you already, your bank sends you like a YubiKey or that like keychain that has those changing passwords. You can enact something like that as well. This is what our screen looks like. So it's all one screen if you're using multi-factor from us. It's through Duo, but you can manage it in your COMPLYAUTO screen. Okay, now I want to go into that third pillar or third area, is that consumer privacy rights, as this is an area that we're seeing the FTC have more and more enforcement in. So consumer privacy rights, it's like, hey, what are my rights as a consumer? And, hey, only some states have this rule, Cheryl. Do I need to be concerned? And yes, even though New Jersey or New York right now do not have these, you can see that they're colored in. Your neighbor, Connecticut, has passed one of these rules. But not only do you need to be concerned whether it's a state rule, but the FTC really wants a piece of state privacy action. And they're doing a lot of enforcement issues under Section 5, like unfair deceptive acts. There's 2 7-figure lawsuits from the FTC this year alone, and that was GoodRx just 2 weeks ago. GoodRx did not have the right cookie banners. They were not notifying their consumers of what content that they were collecting, and they got a 7-figure. And then also Five Guys, the hamburger joint, if you have. So if you're a target, if you're not getting explicit consent to load tracking cookies for retargeting, meaning, hey, do you already load those cookie tracking? I've seen a lot of your websites do that, like where Facebook and Pixel Ads and Google all loads before the customer clicks on that accept. You should have the correct cookie banner where it does not do that. They have to say accept, and you have to have a decline button the same size, and before they can go further into your website, okay? And then we've seen that there's been some class action lawsuits and some other rules there that I have there. And that if you are in one of those states, whether you're in one of those states, if you have a consumer, so if you have someone coming over in Connecticut or Virginia that is shopping in your area and they have these rules, you have to make sure that you're abiding by those laws. Otherwise, you could get fines from those states. They will cross state lines and fine you, and they can range anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000. So what you need to be worried about is cookie consent management. Are you doing the right, collecting the right area information? Are you giving that customer that option? Or do you have like do not track signals? And then your online privacy policy, like when was the last time you looked at your policy? Did your website provider write that? Or did you have an attorney review it with your state rules and federal laws and things? And then if I was a consumer, how would I be able to tell your dealership that I want to exercise my right and opt out of the sharing of information? And so do you have some sort of a portal on that online privacy policy for them to notify you? And so this is an example of, we rewrite the privacy policy for you here and keep it updated with your state and federal laws. This is the portal. So you need something like this that where a customer can either submit to no or be deleted or opt out of any of that sharing. And then what does your cookie banner look like? Do you have like that accept decline button? Do you always have like your privacy choices at like where that needs to stay on your website at all times so they can come back to it and pop up that privacy settings where they can turn on and off cookie settings if they need to, okay? Other state requirements we've seen, specifically, not necessarily to New Jersey, but that some states are requiring everyone to have consumer privacy rights. Or in California and Virginia, they're doing third-party vendor data processing agreements on business-related, like B2B, or employee rights, privacy rights, like HR. So we would track all that for you, but just be aware of some of those rules. And then there's also a thing out there for you if you are looking to whether lower your risk further or maybe your insurance premiums. You could do something like CIS Secure Suite membership. The reason why you would do that, we help you with that at COMPLYAUTO, but in some of those states I've written out there, they offer safe harbor for dealers or businesses that adhere to like a CIS controls. You're going over and beyond, meaning like you've done anything and everything in your power to not just the bare minimum to protect your data. And if you still had a data breach, some of those states would actually give you a safe harbor from any liabilities. Okay, so what to expect in the coming months, things that you'll notice if you're working on towards compliance. Multi-factor authentication will be on everything. You should have more complex passwords. We kind of already went over it, the 8 to 14 characters. You need to be setting up automatic timeouts on your computers of 15 minutes or less. You definitely want to be phishing your employees, sending them those phishing emails. And then be sure to place controls on sharing sensitive customer information. Not everyone needs that information, so only those that are in a need to know either have access to those files or those database systems. And then if you do not have a corporate email account, meaning you do not have like abcmotors.com as your email address, you really need to go to this. This is going to be very hard for you to comply with the law and do all that employee monitoring and logging and phishing susceptibility and controlling of the information if you do not have that domain name. The days gone by where employees did not have a company email address has gone away. Make sure that you're doing some sort of security awareness training, and unfortunately, we need to look at our cookie banners. It's going to mean less retargeting or maybe a little bit less marketing information, but that's the way the law is going. Probably in 5 years, cookie banners will be completely against law. So do use a password manager tool. I just said you had to have really complex passwords. So look at something, there's a lot of free ones out there. We use Dashlane at COMPLYAUTO. That way your people they're not tempted to put like the Post-it notes behind the keyboard with all their passwords or that Excel spreadsheets, okay? And we wanna make sure that we're not repeating any of those passwords. You do need to set up individual user profiles or workstations. So like having all your porters log into one computer and sharing that workstation. They can still use that workstation. They just each have to have their own individual profiles at that one workstation, okay? And then do use the corporate email accounts. No personal email addresses should be used for work purposes. Make sure we're using that tool to receive encrypted email if we have customer email information. No, you don't have to encrypt every email, but just the ones with the customer information. And then if you've not made an upgrade yet on your machines, let's make sure that like, yes, let's do that upgrade tonight, or yes, let's upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10 or have the latest operating systems on all your machines. And then do check every email for suspicious content. Do you know where it's coming from? Is that the right email address? This seems too good to be true. We need to make sure that we're not clicking on a lot of those things and it just gets reported as spam or phishing attempt and delete it completely. Don't even look at it. So again, COMPLYAUTO can help you. We are a one-stop shop for everything, but I did want to give you another resource. This is a great resource from the NADA. If you haven't already read it, you can download it if you're a member for free, or you can shoot me an email and I can send it to you afterwards. It has a lot of content that I just went over. It gives you some suggestions, even some templates, and COMPLYAUTO also helps co-author it. But again, we are an NADA affinity provider, and we can help you from soup to nuts, everything, one-stop shop, and get you 100% compliant, okay, including MFA. A little bit about COMPLYAUTO. Hey, we're month to month. We treat dealers the way they want to be treated, so we don't believe in any long-term contracts. You do get a dedicated client success manager, and if you order any of our technical tools like the EDR or MFA, you get a technical support team. And unlike most software companies, I don't require you only to speak to them 3 times and then I charge you for it. You get unlimited access to them. We have no setup fees. I don't believe in any hidden fees like implementation fees or service charges or installation costs of $5,000 to get started. We don't do that here. It's just a simple monthly subscription. Now it does start the very first month you sign up with us, much like your gym membership, even if you don't go to it. But I will give you your first month free. You have to earn it while we're setting you up. And that is, I want you to fill out a simple setup survey. It's kind of like, think of it as Match.com profile account. Hey, who are you that we'll be working with in the dealership? What are your employees? What email list, and what are some of your websites, so we can start working on your behalf, and then we set up our first meeting. You also can get an annual discount of up to 10% for annual billing when you have annual billing, excuse me. So that doesn't negate that you're in a contract or anything. You're still month to month. So if you decided to forego using us, you'd get refunded any of the portion unused. And then we are endorsed by 35 different states. You can see them there. Oh, I need to change this. We actually have South Dakota, North Dakota, and North Carolina. So I need to update that. And then finally, join the nation's #1 privacy cybersecurity platform. We are at over 7,500 dealers, but the biggest reason I think to use us is we give you a little peace of mind. We have the industry's only compliance guarantee, meaning, hey, if you have someone else doing this, are they going to give you the same peace of mind? We want you to worry less so you can sell more. We're so confident that we have followed every law to the T and get you compliant that if we miss a rule or a fine and you get fined or a violation, we will pay for that rule for you, okay? And there's a couple of our dealers below that use us. And then pricing. I did not go over pricing. We have very simple pricing. I keep it up on my website. I don't believe in hiding pricing, so it's out there for you to see. It's very simple based on your rooftops. $8.99 if you're a single rooftop. If you have multiple stores, it's $5.39. And then that's my QR code right there, scan for content info. So if you need my direct email or a telephone number, you can drop me a line and I will get back to you today, okay? So that went right at 45 minutes. Do you guys have any questions that I can help with? I want to open it up to questions.
Yes, we do have a couple of them, Cheryl. And if anybody has any other questions, please enter them into the questions tab. I'm going to tease Cheryl a little bit. You definitely can't fall asleep during your presentation because you're a fast talker.
I am. There's a lot to go after, and I try to make it entertaining.
And I actually, one of the people commented about, like, you're really fast. And I'm like, so I'm going to tell everybody, Obviously, as you can tell, a lot of information to cover in a very short amount of time. But don't worry if you missed anything. A recording of this webinar and the slides are going to be on the NJCAR website later this afternoon. So you can go back, you can listen to a part that you maybe didn't quite hear everything you wanted to hear. You can review the slides. Cheryl is going to send these to me, and I think we're going to send them out to everybody on the call. So yeah, we did have a couple of questions, however, Cheryl. So let me address those, and we'll see, take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So does the Comply penetration test meet the requirement?
You mean the COMPLYAUTO penetration test? Yes, it does. In fact, it's very, very advanced. We have the same technology that Deloitte uses, and Toyota Motors and a couple other Fortune 500. So yes, it does.
Okay, is EDR enough, or is MDR needed?
Under the rule, the FTC does not say like what level you have to have. So like they direct, the way we've read the rule and stuff is, or the way lawyers have read the rule is, EDR would suffice. Just know that if there's any action that happens in the middle of the night or something like that, you may not be able to intervene on your behalf. So that's where some dealerships or businesses prefer having both those protections. But yes, EDR is sufficient enough. Now, if you get any of that package with COMPLYAUTO, like all that secondary package I showed you, the EDR, the DLP, the MFA, and the encryption, we offer, it's either between $7 and $9 per user. So most of that is software that you get charged on a per user basis. We are normally less than half, if not a third of the cost of most of our competitors out there. So we would have an EDR, MDR is included with the MFA and data loss protection.
Okay, we have one more here, unless anybody else clicks in. And then if, I'm not sure if Grayson or Judy have anything they want to add, but I'll give you this last question, and then we can give Grayson and Judy a chance to chime in if they like. Do you feel a dealership needs to have an individual specifically hired or employed to handle the safeguarding rules for their dealership?
Depends on how you're using it. So if you're using someone like COMPLYAUTO, no, absolutely not. Most of the time you have to define who your qualified individual is. In our case at COMPLYAUTO, most of them are either a business manager or the controller, the general manager, or the dealer themselves. As we walk you through the process, we do some of the work for you in the background. We automate a lot of it. So it's just where you are spending, a couple hours, every quarter. But if you are not using a company like COMPLYAUTO, you will probably need to hire someone full-time to go through all this. Yes, because you're going to have to send out all those vendor contracts and make sure you're tracking all of that. Are all your employees up to speed on all their training, et cetera? So it just depends on how you're doing it. But generally speaking, for our almost 8,000 customers, no, they've not gone out and hired anyone.
Okay, I have one more question here. Does your MFA allow for manager override on a device?
Okay, I'm gonna have to come back to that one on the technical one. I guess maybe, okay, if you ask that question, if you don't mind scanning me and dropping me that email so I can follow up with you with my chief technical officer. I've not been asked that question in over 250 demonstrations. So I want to double check that. Generally speaking, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I shouldn't assume I know the answer. You know what assumption does, but the point of MFA is not to have any overrides.
Okay.
But please drop me that question, or Brian, if you can tell me who it is so I can get back to that person on that, okay?
Okay, well, Grayson, Judy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Grayson Hannigan here, Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs for NJCAR. I just wanted to thank Cheryl for another, for a great presentation, and I just want to let our members know that, listen, June 9th is coming up, and as the deadline approaches, you want to make sure that you are in compliance, and whether it's COMPLYAUTO or do it yourself, that you've decided to do, or another entity, that all we care about is that you are in compliance, and that you're doing it well, and that you don't get fined by by the FTC.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say that Cheryl, thanks for great presentation.
Yes, and if I could just weigh in, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody, I know some of you have already gotten started on this. Cheryl gave us a lot of the advanced, this was called the advanced safeguards rule. So I believe there was a lot of information that maybe you hadn't heard, or maybe you have in certain pieces. But if you don't have your IT person on, or the person who's in charge of doing a lot of this for you, it's probably important to weigh some of them in and certainly listen to this presentation again. And Cheryl, you did a great job as always. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And hey, if you guys have questions, I know that it's a lot, whether you use COMPLYAUTO or not, you can always shoot me an email as we want to help you get compliant, okay?
Yep, and if you'd like a demo, you can go on their website, or you can contact Gail Caputi, and she'll set up an appointment for you, or myself as well. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
So thank you to Cheryl, Grayson, and Judy, and thank you to all participants. As I said earlier, a recording of today's webinar and the slides will be up on our website probably later this afternoon. So in case you missed part of the presentation, or someone else at your dealership that you feel need the information that was provided. So thanks again, and that will end today's webinar. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye-bye.